Although the following tools are not strictly speaking drawing tools, but I still prefer to mention them in this chapter because I think of them as alternative ways of editing your existing lines or shapes. So I'm talking about mainly these tools here under the width tool and even including the width tool. And I call these distort tools, but they have their names like warp tool, twirl tool, and so on and so forth, whatever you can see in this list. Remember, if you click on an arrow on the right side, whenever you see multiple tools joined together, you can turn that into a little floating palette of tools, which you can always move around. And if you also use these tools often, remember you can also put them onto your custom tools panel. But let me walk you through this. So we already seen the width tool in previous videos, but let's start with warp tool, and that is probably the easiest to understand how it works. All you have to do with this tool is to simply drag over parts of your illustration. So you can see in every direction I can change the shape very quickly and easily. And it is a very effective tool. Of course, you can distort your shapes completely if you want to, and after a while completely ruin it. It is good to know that there is a shortcut to change the size of the brush. If you hold down the Alt key, you can click and drag the mouse and you can see how it changes its size, but not only the size, its shape as well. So you can create a much different shape to the original, and then with this you can do different effects as well, distorting in slightly different ways. And if you need more options, you can also double click on the tool itself, and there you will find both the width and height, which we changed with the Alt or Option key. But then we also have angle, intensity, and even pen pressure can be turned on in case you are using a tablet that supports pen pressure. Apart from all this, you even have options for how much detail you want to create while you are warping objects, and also whether you want to simplify them or not, and again, the amount of that simplification you can set. I'm going to just cancel out of here, and I'm going to undo these last couple of steps I've done, and keep it probably around there. And then let's move on to the next tool called Twirl tool. Now this is also quite interesting, and by the way, notice that the settings on the brush stays the same even when I switch between the distort tools. So they share the same brush size and shape. If I want to change that, remember hold down Alt or Option and I can set it up the way I want it. Let's say somewhere around there. It's probably a little bit more towards a circular shape like this. Now with this tool, if I click and hold over parts of my illustration, I can create twirls. And the longer I hold it down, the more warped the shapes will get. If you find that this tool is a little bit hard to control, go into its options and reduce its intensity, or you can also turn on the pressure sensitivity. But let's just say I'm going to reduce it down to 10%. When I click OK, you can try it again, and now it will be much slower. So it's almost like an animation speed when you change the intensity. And if you want to have better control, just keep it low. Here's another interesting tool, Pucker. This is going to shrink every detail towards the center of your brush. So if I do it, let's say here on the statue, we can see it's going to shrink every detail toward the center point of my brush. And we can make the Statue of Liberty much slimmer. Or I can use the opposite of this, which is the bloat tool, to make things bigger. It's, as the name says, bloats every detail up. So from the center outward, you can make things much bigger. And once again, this tool, of course, has also the intensity option. And notice that that is also shared between all of these tools. And although it was 10%, it still feels like a little bit too intense. So I'm just going to reduce it even further down, let's say to 2%. And when I hold it down, I can be a little bit more precise. So I could increase the size of the head. Maybe we can zoom closer and try to increase the size of the flame or the whole torch. And you can see how I managed to distort it. Now you can already see that these tools are great if you want to do quickly caricatures and modify the proportions of your illustration. And for these proportional changes, I would mainly use the warp, the pucker, and the bloat tools. because the twirl is a little bit more specific. It's not something I would use all the time, but it's great for like hair or flowers, or floral motifs. And similar to this tool, there's also 3 other tools which are quite similar to each other: scallop, crystallize, and wrinkle. Now let me show you these on this last landmark here, the leaning tower. And you can achieve a lot of things with them depending how you use them. But let's start with the last one, called wrinkle tool. I mainly think of this as a melting tool. So I like to create melting effects with it, but once again, it can be used for so many different things. I like to turn things into more fluid materials, like dripping water or chocolate or something like that. And let's just try it on here. So if I start drawing down, so I'm always keeping drawing down, you can see what I mean about the melting effect. So that's how this tool works, and it is pretty effective. You can also use it around the edges, melt those lines a little bit down. So it almost looks like a candle now, and that's a quite quick and easy effect to do. We could also melt the hand of the Statue of Liberty as well if we want. But then let's switch to the other tool, the crystallize tool, with which you can click and hold on to an area and blow it up, or almost like an explosion this looks like. Again, let's just try this on the crown, and you can see we can turn it really quickly into something like a bushy hair. Now, we can also do the opposite, so instead of exploding lines, to bring them closer, and that is the scallop tool. So these two actually are the opposite of each other, similarly to the pucker and bloat, if we are talking about pairs of distortion tools. So when I select the scallop tool and I click on an area, what happens, as you can see, is all the lines are drawn to the center point. Let's just try this on the leaning tower. You can see exactly the same thing happens. So it brings all the details together. As I said, it really depends how and when you use these tools, but remember that they are all available for making alterations and changes to your existing objects. And if we are talking about distortions and distort tools, let's not forget about the free transform tool as well, which is also a great feature. Let me just select the leaning tower, for example, and then switch to the free transform tool. I will also close my other palette. Now, this actually works with gestures if you have a touch screen, and you can do a lot of things with the free transform tool. You can, of course, rotate, scale, but you can also shear objects, and you can also do perspective distortion on them. If you switch to that option here, you will be able to do perspective distortion, or even free distort. So if you select that, then each point, each corner point can be moved individually. It's the same as holding down Control or Command when you use the free transform tool in Photoshop. So you can very quickly change the angle in which you look at objects. So that's another great technique if you want to add some depth or perspective to your drawings. And there's only one last thing that we didn't talk about, and that is the reflect tool, which I would also consider a distortion tool or transformation tool. But this deserves 2 separate videos. In the next one, I'm going to explain how to do symmetrical drawing, and then after that, I will also show you how to do radial or concentric drawings by using primarily the reflect tool.